Welcome to BlitzBiz. I'm Dr. Applesmith. Let's begin with today's video. At 3 a.m. on May 2nd, 2026, something happened that hadn't happened in America in 25 years. A major airline just stopped. No warning. No customer service line to call. No final announcement over the intercom. Just yellow kiosks going dark in terminals across the country. Passengers arriving at Fort Lauderdale International that morning were still being dropped off by Ubers for flights that no longer existed. They found out standing at the curb. Well, one woman was mid-vacation in Mexico. She found out her flight home had been canceled when she checked her phone. There was no flight home. The airline was gone. 17,000 employees lost their jobs that night. 9,000 flights vanished from the schedule. And 60,000 Americans who had tickets for the next 30 days were told, figure it out yourself. This is the full story of how Spirit Airlines, the most complained about, most mocked, most used budget airline in America, died overnight. And why it means your flights are about to get more expensive. Before we talk about the collapse, let's talk about what Spirit actually was. Because every American has a Spirit Airlines story. The seats that don't recline, the fees for everything, carry-on bags, seat selection, even printing your boarding pass. The bright yellow planes that somehow always seem to be delayed. Spirit was the airline everyone complained about, and everyone kept flying. And that's because Spirit did something genuinely important for American consumers. It made flying cheap. Before Spirit, a round trip from New York to Florida might cost $400 on Delta. Spirit would do it for $59. That $59 wasn't really $59 once you added fees, but it was still cheaper than the competition. And here's what most people don't know. You didn't even have to fly Spirit to benefit from Spirit. When Spirit entered a new route, every other airline on that route dropped their prices to compete. United, Delta, American, all of them lowered fares when Spirit showed up. Consumer advocates estimate that Spirit's presence on a route saved passengers an average of $40 per ticket, even on other airlines. That's gone now. Spirit flew 34 years. It flew more than 50 million passengers a year at its peak, and it died in a single night. Spirit's death didn't happen overnight. It took years of bad luck and worse decisions. The problem started with money. Spirit hadn't turned an annual profit since 2019. Between 2020 and 2026, it lost over $2.5 billion. COVID devastated every airline, but the big carriers, Delta, United, American, had the financial cushion to survive. Spirit didn't. Then came the merger that never was. In 2022, Frontier Airlines offered to buy Spirit for $2.9 billion. It would have created a budget airline powerhouse, the fifth largest carrier in America. Spirit's board said yes. Then JetBlue swooped in with a higher offer, $3.8 billion. Spirit's shareholders said yes to JetBlue instead. 2 years of lawyers, regulators, and courtrooms followed. And in January 2024, a federal judge blocked the deal. Too much consolidation. Bad for competition. Spirit was left with nothing. No merger, no cash infusion, and a business model that was already bleeding money. It filed for bankruptcy for the first time in November 2024. Bankruptcy was supposed to be a reset. Cut the debt. Restructure. Come back smaller but stable. That didn't work, because something nobody predicted happened next. In early 2026, the US and Israel launched military strikes against Iran. What followed was the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical oil shipping lanes on Earth. Global oil supply contracted overnight, crude oil prices crossed $100 a barrel, and jet fuel, the single biggest operating cost for any airline, spiked to levels that made Spirit's already struggling math completely impossible. Here's what Spirit's CEO said about that moment. He said that just 4 days before the strike, he and his team were still optimistic they could survive bankruptcy. The plan was working. Then oil prices went vertical. Late March, early April, the numbers stopped working. There was no path forward. Spirit flew its last international flights on Thursday, April 30th, to make sure no passengers would be stranded abroad. It flew more than 50,000 people on its final day. And then at 3 a.m. on May 2nd, 2026, it was over. The last Spirit flight landed at Dallas-Fort Worth International. Air traffic controllers signed off with, It was a pleasure working with you guys. Godspeed. Here's the part of this story that most people missed. Spirit almost didn't die. In the final days before the shutdown, the Trump administration put together a rescue deal. $500 million, a federal cash injection to keep Spirit flying. In exchange, the government would take up to 90% ownership of the airline. President Trump himself signaled his approval. But Spirit's bondholders, including some of the biggest hedge funds in America, Citadel and Ares Management, said no. They didn't like the terms. The government would be put ahead of them in the creditor line. Their loans would be worth less. So they rejected it. A counterproposal from the creditors was then rejected by the government, and with cash almost completely depleted, there was no time left. The bondholders who rejected the deal to protect their position ended up with nothing. Spirit's pilots and flight attendants found out they had lost their jobs via email, sent between 6 and 7 p.m. on the final day. One union message to flight attendants read, "We are delivering the hardest news of our lives. 17,000 people gone." So what does Spirit's collapse actually mean for the average American? First, if you have a Spirit ticket, you are entitled to a full refund. File through your credit card company if Spirit's refund process is too slow. Your Spirit miles and credits are almost certainly worthless. The airline is in wind down. File a claim in bankruptcy court, but don't expect much. Second, and this is the bigger issue, your flights on other airlines are about to get more expensive. Spirit flew 5% of all U.S. passengers. That 5% has to go somewhere. United, Delta, American, Southwest, they are now absorbing Spirit's passengers on routes that Spirit no longer competes on. And without Spirit competing, they have zero reason to keep prices low on those routes. Consumer advocates estimate that on certain Spirit routes, particularly in Florida, the Caribbean, and budget leisure destinations, prices could rise 20 to 40%. If you regularly flew from a city that Spirit served, check those routes now. Book 6 to 12 months out if you can. And if you are a Spirit employee, American, United, and Southwest all put up job portals specifically for Spirit workers in the days after the shutdown. Those are worth checking immediately. So what does Spirit's collapse actually teach us about business? Because this isn't just an airline story. It's a masterclass in how businesses die. Lesson 1, thin margins have no room for error. Spirit's entire model was built on being the cheapest option. That meant razor-thin profit margins. The moment oil prices spiked, a single external event Spirit couldn't control, the whole thing collapsed. When you compete only on price, you have no buffer. None. Lesson 2. Failed M&A is more dangerous than no M&A. The 2 years Spirit spent fighting for and then losing the JetBlue merger cost it time, money, and strategic momentum it couldn't afford to lose. While it was in courtrooms, it wasn't restructuring. It wasn't cutting costs. It was waiting. And waiting costed everything. Lesson 3. Creditors can kill companies. Spirit's bondholders rejected a bailout that would have saved 17,000 jobs because the terms weren't perfect for them. In the end, they got nothing anyway. Their decision to hold out for better terms resulted in the worst possible outcome for everyone. When negotiations get too adversarial, everyone loses. Lesson 4. External shocks kill the weakest players first. COVID didn't kill Spirit. Oil prices didn't kill Delta. External shocks don't hit all companies equally. They hit the ones with the least financial cushion. Building reserves and maintaining flexibility isn't just good management, it's survival. Spirit Airlines flew for 34 years. It changed how Americans travel. It forced every major airline to lower their prices. It made flying accessible to people who couldn't afford it before. And it died because of a war it had nothing to do with, a merger that fell apart in court, and a bailout that missed by one rejected term sheet. The CEO said it best. We just kind of ran out of runway. That line will stick with me for a long time. If you want more real stories about the companies and decisions that shape your everyday life, subscribe to BlitzBiz. New video every week. See you next time.